This is me harvesting my flow-through bin. I opened the bottom up and just kind of shook it a little bit, and stuff fell out. There seemed to be a couple of worms down there, despite how dry it seems to me. So I guess they're still processing it, even though it's dry down there. I'm just lifting them back up and putting them back in the top. Here's two more. This is like right at the bottom. My mom asked me if they fall out, and I guess they could, but there were no worms in the bin before I started shaking it, so they seem to be pretty much in control of it. Despite it being very fluffy and dry, there are actually worms living and moving through there quite easily. You can see there's one right there trying to get away from the light. And even though I would say this is pretty dry stuff, he seems to be quite healthy. Not as lively as I'd prefer them to be, but I think I just woke him up. So anyway, let's see. You can see what happens. I haven't raised the PVC pipes any higher. I need to make the pipes a bit taller because my bag turned out longer than I expected. But here I've opened up the bottom, and I just tap it like that, and dry stuff is coming out. And like, here's a piece of cardboard that didn't get processed, and I'll put that back in the top. And I think I just saw a few worms down in there. Considering how dry this is, I want to catch them as quickly as possible and put them back in the bin, because considering that it is kind of dry, but they still have some moisture in this area, otherwise they wouldn't be living there. I don't want them to dry out in the open air being so much thinner than this. But yeah, this even being so low to the floor, this is actually pretty easy to harvest. I'm just tapping it and letting what falls out fall out. And before I had dug up inside it, but I think that might be a bit overkill, because if it's finished, it's going to fall out. Pretty good for what used to be a bunch of rotted pepper plants and celery bottoms and whatever else I could throw in there. Of course, all the unfinished stuff is the bedding that I actually put in there with them, so that's not going to be a problem. I'll just add it back, and it'll do its job holding moisture and giving them something to move through. I'm really actually surprised at the number of worms that are down in this drier material. I just kind of let it sit there for a moment, and they all started squirming around. I guess they're happy where they were, but I'm just really surprised that with so many of them in that dry area. I thought they would want the more moist area. I also see other things moving around in there that I'm pretty sure aren't worms. Probably where my little fat bottom, red bottom gnats have been coming from. But so long as they don't get out of control, it's not a problem. I've been using moist paper as my top cover. As you can see here, it's just moist paper, and it seems to keep everything under control. I'd seen mentioned where people suggest using dry paper on top. I think that's for bins that are box kind of bins that don't have drainage on the bottom, to kind of control some of the moisture. But if I use dry paper, my bin would probably completely dry. I like to use the moist paper, and I guess the moisture can either evaporate away or move down into the bin to provide some moisture for the worms in any of the dry spots. But also, when I had dry paper on top one time, I opened it up and a lot of little gnatty guys came flying out really quickly. But when the paper is moist, I guess they can't fly so easily. They just kind of crawl out. And by then I've put in my vegetable matter and zipped it back up so they don't explode. Come this spring, when the weather warms up, I'm probably going to bring this outside to see how it does. I'm not really sure if that's going to be a good idea or a bad idea, because I don't want it to be infested with other insects or attacked by possums or raccoons or whatever out there. So I might actually make a hard-sided bin, a trash can bin for that, since it'll provide more protection from weather changes and such. But just I don't know. This seems to be a success so far. I'm obviously still separating worms from the finished product, which is a little bit different than what it was claimed. They'll move up and then the finished product won't have any. But you know, that's not a big deal for me. At least it's not all wet, icky, and sticky and everything. I can handle this. It's easy to separate them because the material is so wet and they're so squiggly. I can just easily reach in and grab them, as opposed to trying to dig around in wet material and separating them. Anyway, that's an update on my laundry bag blow through worm in, whatever you want to call it. Alright, well, since I have to go to work soon and I didn't want to risk leaving this pan full of hidden worms to potentially climb out the sides and die on my kitchen floor while I'm away, I've decided that I'm going to go ahead and process these castings. What came out the bottom is actually pretty fine. If you look at that, it's pretty fine textured. But in the last recording, I said that I saw things crawling around in there that I didn't think were worms. Well, I was wrong. They were worms, very, very tiny, string-like worms. And seeing as how I found a bunch of cocoons in this lower part, of course there are still some little crawly bugs. I see one crawling over there. Anyway, I didn't want to take a chance of having my workforce either escape or dry out, because this is drying out very quickly. I've had a couple of times I've gone ahead and misted it just to keep the worms that are in there from drying out, because this is drying very quickly. I've just taken a hand sifter and just put a little bit in there, and I'm just going to sift them out. And whatever's fine enough to go through that mesh is going to fall down in there, and any material that's not finished or any worms. That's not very focused, but there's a couple of worms there. There are a couple of worms there. That's just going to go back in the bin. I actually didn't expect to get this much fine casting this quickly, but you know, I'm not in a hurry to use it, so it doesn't matter if some of it goes back in, especially if it has cocoons in it. I want them to hatch in the bin. I don't mind if they hatch in the garden, but since I'm not even ready for my garden yet, this can be for my house plants and other plants that might need it in the meantime. But this way I can also assure that anybody who fell out of the bottom of the bin is going to go back on top of the bin to keep doing their work. So anyway, that's how I'm doing it now. I'll probably get a bigger one of these if, you know, when I plan to do it, you know, more seriously when I have a few more minutes. But for now, this will take care of what's come out the bottom, and as you can see, this is actually even finer. That's awesome. And there are no cocoons and no worms, so I don't have to worry if this dries out. I can always just mix it in with the dirt and soil and water it in. Whereas this stuff here, which is straight from the bottom of the bin, you know, could still have some potential cocoons and worms, and I don't want them to die. So this is what I'm doing. Thanks for watching my update.